some migrant shelters may begin downsizing, including the shelter out on Randalls Island.
That shelter in particular, lately known for quality of life issues and a spike in violent crime, but that's about to change.
It sure is, because after months of pressure, the city has decided to shut down that particular facility, which is one of the largest asylum shelters it operates. But while local activists applaud the closure of this facility, since the city says it's no longer needed as U.S. border crossings are down, critics say that the shelter was not only illegal to set up, but also had high levels of gang activity taking place inside. But one thing's for sure, the closure of this 3,000-person facility means everyone living there is going to need to be relocated to physical buildings like hotels.
The Randalls Island Migrant Shelter will permanently close by February next year. The Randalls Island Shelter has been the site of numerous violent crimes. Police even raided the shelter looking for weapons and also dismantled some tent encampments set up nearby.
We need to not have mega congregate tent shelters. That's just not appropriate. It's not safe. It's not healthy for anyone. We want to make sure that people who need shelter are getting appropriate shelter in our shelter system.
The Adams administration didn't go into further detail on what that means and if they are going to be removing the tents, but insisted that these types of encampments are illegal, despite the fact that the city put up porta potties next to a sort of makeshift market.
Tents have got to go. That's the message from a community group pushing to get a migrant shelter off of Randalls Island, and they are threatening legal action tonight.
When you see some of the hypocrisy of people who are saying, bring us your tired, your weak, your huddle masters, yearning to be free, but not on my block.
So after gangs were discovered operating out of New York's most controversial shelter, its eventual shutdown was all but guaranteed. But what nobody's talking about is this massive facility. It wasn't just controversial because of the levels of criminal activity taking place inside. It housed 3,000 people, which critics said was too many. And it also cost $10,000 a month per person to operate. Now, of course, people's lives are worth infinitely more than that, but this shelter, which was supposed to be a humanitarian refuge for thousands fleeing poverty, it became everything except that, and it's still going to remain open for half a year, which means the gangs who've been documented infiltrating this facility will get to keep using it before it shuts down. And while it's being shut down, everyone who lives there is going to be relocated to the city's other shelters, many of which are in former luxury hotels. But that's not controversial because the city's got many vulnerable people living here which need a place to stay and aren't gang members. But while they're closing it down, claiming that our demand for shelter space is lower than it was, they're also shopping around for 14,000 more hotel rooms to use as part of their emergency housing system, which seems to indicate that the asylum crisis here isn't drawing to a close. Instead, it's slowly becoming the new normal here in America's largest sanctuary city. And that brings us to the real reason why closing this shelter is not the immigration-related victory that some people say it is. Because New York's had shelters open and close in the past, yet the right to shelter policies that mandate their existence, those aren't going anywhere. And critics say that means the asylum crisis in this city could continue for a long time. Because even if the U.S. shuts its border down completely and nobody's allowed in, millions of people are still experiencing humanitarian disasters outside of our country. And although the majority of the 200,000 asylum seekers who've come to New York are well-meaning and are here for the American dream, a small but active criminal element has disguised itself and entered the city along with them. And because this is a sanctuary city, critics say that allows the bad guys to live out their evil fantasies while the city unknowingly takes care of them. And as you're about to see, until New York fixes that problem, the real crisis that destroyed many of the places these asylum seekers are fleeing, that's gonna remain. Only it's gonna be right here in New York, waiting for them. So there's something very strange going on with the asylum crisis and this Randalls Island shelter, because every single week, 700 to 1,000 people arrive in the city looking for a place to stay. And a lot of them ended up getting a place to stay at Randalls Island. And 2 months ago, there were so many people living in this facility that a tent encampment had sprung up outside of its doors, full of people who were no longer allowed back inside as they'd been evicted after their temporary shelter stays were up. That's how our system here works. Our shelter stays expire before they actually get around to helping anybody. But not only were people getting kicked out of the shelter because it was over capacity, it was was also reportedly being used by a gang for them to commit crime all over the place. Yet now, fast forward a few weeks and we're doing a victory lap while there are people living in tents in a field outside this place that's being shut down because apparently we don't need it anymore. And city officials are out looking for another 14,000 hotel rooms for next year. Something's off about this.
Breaking news, the NYPD right now dismantling an encampment on Randalls Island. Now, earlier today, they confiscated and removed several vehicles.
You'll see unregistered cars, mopeds, stolen mopeds.
Chief of Patrol John.
So obviously the lawlessness and the activity taking place in and around this facility, that's not good. It's not good for the people who live there, that's for sure, because now they're going to get caught up in it. But look at the things the police were taking away. Abandoned vehicles. And you know why that's important? Well, it reveals that when people get kicked out of our shelter system, they don't necessarily graduate to permanent housing. Instead, people have been found living in abandoned vehicles. It's very sad. Which exposes the fact that this crisis is far from over, even while the U.S. border is seeing less crossings now than it was a year ago. But in addition to stolen vehicles, apparently a large number of stolen or unregistered mopeds were also removed from the parking lot out in front of this facility, and those are part of another crime wave. Apparently, gang members have been using them in purse snatchings and random drive-by holdups where they rob someone on the side of the street and then ride away. This kind of thing was happening at restaurants over the summer, very frightening, and this large number of stolen illegal mopeds out front lends itself to the idea that a gang is operating out of this place, using it as a base for criminal activity all over the city. But this is where things stop making sense. Because while many asylum seekers are still making the journey to New York and are going to need a place to stay, you've got places for them to stay, but they're being ruined by a criminal element that is being allowed to flourish and do whatever they want. And if you close these facilities down, you're going to have to relocate every single person who lives there to another place. And that includes gang members the city knows are staying there. And it reveals the misguided nature of our entire humanitarian asylum crisis that's supposed to be helping people, because shelters that have gang members inside of them that aren't safe, that's not helping anybody. And when you look at all the tents popping up outside of these places, the shelters themselves, they're not helping the people who live there accomplish the ability to live on their own, that's for sure. On top of that, this closure is happening at a point in time where the crisis at the border is supposedly at a lull, where it's drawing down. But is that going to continue forever? Is that temporary? And will the city end up opening more shelters in the future than it has today?
We don't care about your status. We're here to fight crime, whoever you may be, wherever you hang out, wherever you live.
Right now, some migrants appear to be living right outside the shelter doors on Randalls Island. You'll find a makeshift barber shop, food stands, and police posted close to this big encampment. The Adams administration has said it will.
So it's important to understand a couple of things. Everything we're seeing right now happening at this facility, it's happening after the U.S. border has undergone an increase in security measures. And if the situation down there were to change, everything happening in New York could change as well. And second, it's not the fault of the asylum seekers that things are turning out this way. Remember, they've been invited to New York by a humanitarian apparatus telling them that their best days were just around the corner, just a couple of weeks in a shelter, and you'll be back on your feet. No problem. That hasn't been happening. And the reason you've got tents and vending in some cases is because people who came here with good intentions now have to do things to survive they wish they didn't have to. But this raid that happened at the shelter that cleared out the encampments that were out front and the mini market that had sprung up, that took place about a month ago. And in the time period since then, the level of vending and similar activities taking place on Roosevelt Avenue in Queens went through the roof, which makes it look like all of the activity that was in front of the shelter here just got transferred to somewhere else. And you see many of the same things. People selling items that might be stolen on blankets on the side of the street, food vendors of various sorts who, according to local community leaders, are not licensed and are not supposed to be there. And when I was on Roosevelt Avenue, I saw one of these women setting things up on a blanket, pulling them out of a suitcase, and she got the suitcase from a man that walked over to her as she was unfolding the blanket and gave it to her. I saw that guy walk maybe 25 yards down the sidewalk to another woman who's doing the exact same thing, and she had a briefcase that looked similar. The briefcase was full of tools that looked like they may have come from Home Depot. And with all the reports of a violent Venezuelan gang doing things all over the city, the truth about these illegal vending operations might be a lot more frightening than any of us want to imagine.
Carlos is here from Ecuador. He says he's been living in this shelter for a month and understands why some of the migrants are resorting to vending.
I think it's because of that, because they need help. Sometimes we don't have anyone helping us, anyone sending us anything.
So here we've got a guy who's living in the Randalls Island shelter shelter, and he can understand how many of the people who are in that facility have no other options, and some of them might be doing things that they wish they didn't have to do. Is that an excuse for criminal activity? Absolutely not. But it's the shelter system that has done this to people. It's moved them in, and it hasn't helped them better their lives in any way, and now they're in a very tough position, and that's going to continue whether they live in this massive tent facility or whether they get relocated to a hotel. The same time limits will apply, and the system will accomplish nothing. Which is insane, because when many of these folks got off buses here in the Big Apple, they were under the impression that they were being brought into a system that was going to help them achieve the American dream, and it didn't. And even after this facility shuts down, that system is still going to exist, and it's going to continue achieving the same results. The entire support network has done the opposite of supporting them. It's left them in an even worse state than they were when they walked into these shelters in some cases. But to make things even worse, there is still mass poverty, massive humanitarian disasters taking place outside of our country, which means that even if New York were to shut down all of its shelters, it would still be a sanctuary city, and the asylum crisis here would still continue to exist. So while New York City is in the process of closing down and downsizing some shelters, it's also in the process of looking for new ones for next year. And that's because even though at the U.S. border crossings are down and reported activity is at the lowest level it's been in months, the city is still housing around 60,000 individuals, a massive number of people. And due to the fluid emergency nature of this crisis, the city needs to be able to react if a lot of people start suddenly coming here again in the near future.
Internal figures from the Department of Homeland Security show nearly 54,000 migrants were apprehended last month between legal entry points along the border. That's a 78% drop from last December's record high of 250,000.
So U.S. border crossings, they're the lowest they've been in a while, but we're still getting around 700 people a week, and even if it stays at that number after 4 weeks, that's almost another 3,000 people, another Randalls Island shelter's worth of folks who need a place to stay. At the exact same time, these 60,000 asylum seekers that the city is currently housing, that's only 15% less people that were in shelters at around the start of the year, which means that regardless of border activity, New York is having a tough time getting people on their feet and out of these shelters as quickly as everyone thought was going to happen originally. And even though border activity has slowed, it's taken the city around 10 months to get a reduction in 10,000 shelterees. And with world poverty continuing to rise and thousands of people still coming here, it's going to take the city years to get to a point where it doesn't need these massive emergency shelters anymore. And part of the reason the city's out shopping around for more hotel rooms for next year is because they know that the folks in the shelter system, they're not becoming economically independent as fast as everyone had hoped. They're going to need care for a long time, and contrary to popular belief, not everyone gets evicted from the shelter system after 30 or 60 days. This article here mentions that there are obvious exceptions for families who've got children. They can reapply after 60 days, and also anyone under the age of 23 gets an initial 60-day placement and then can reapply afterwards. So if your situation dictates, you could probably continue to remain in the New York City shelter system for a very long time. But not only is the city's shelter system still housing a very large number of individuals, the whole reason less people are now here seeking shelter has to do with federal policies that New York City does not control. And if those policies change, the asylum crisis here could change as well. And some of these policies that could change in the near future, they're not even policies of the U.S. government. They're policies of the Mexican government.
U.S. officials are attributing this massive drop to two main changes. The Mexican government has been stopping many migrants from getting to the U.S. in the first place, John, as you know, with their own migration crackdown. But the Biden administration...
So border crossings are down, partly because of U.S. federal efforts, but also because of the efforts of the Mexican government, which is great. Of course, having cartels and smugglers running through your country is bad for Mexico as well as the United States. But are these policy changes that their government has enacted, are these going to be permanent? And what if they're not? If they're not permanent, any changes down there are going to immediately be seen here in New York. And what that reveals is that New York's asylum crisis, it's not actually controlled by New York City. Well, it is controlled by New York City. It's just that we've passed laws that mandate that things operate this way. And if changes happen elsewhere in the world, those changes are going to be felt here. And we're not interested in reevaluating our policies like right to shelter. But it's not just that we have laws which mandate housing for anyone who arrives in the city and requests it. No, it's that our humanitarian system is represented presented to asylum seekers as being able to accomplish things, it isn't. And look, this idea of housing the vulnerable, that's something we all have in our hearts that we want to do. We don't want to see families and people sleeping on the streets. We want to do good things for good people, but our sanctuary city laws prevent that from happening. Did you know that the police, they're not even allowed to go into one of these shelters where these gang members might be operating without a specific warrant for a specific person? They can't just go in there and search the place. It says it right here in the New York Post. Police cannot enter these facilities to see what's going on, even after there have been reports of weapons being smuggled inside. And that's a problem because you've got thousands of asylum seekers, the vast majority who didn't come here to be criminals, yet we allow criminals to be here, and that makes the entire crisis much different than it would probably be if this were a law and order city. What do you think about that? If this were a law and order city, would we actually be in a better position to help asylum seekers get back on their feet? Is the city doing the right thing by closing one of the largest shelters it has, even though it's controversial? Should they keep it open because they might need it again in a few months? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.